My name is Gavin Evans, and this is my review for The Eternals. I bet you've been waiting forever for this review. Anyways, this is a movie that I was once looking forward to, but then the first trailer came out for it, and I just thought it looked really bad and boring. And then I watched No Man Land, and I really hated that movie, and it's also directed by Chloe Zhao, so all my anticipation and excitement for this movie died off immediately. Then it came out, and everyone said it's the worst MCU movie, so I'm like, yeah, I'm good, I'll watch it when it's on Disney+, and I just watched it, and I have to say, yep, I was right. This is a very, let's get one more very in there, very bad movie. But let's begin with what I did like. This movie does have some great visuals in moments. Especially one shot near the end with this giant hand that I thought looked really cool. But yeah, this movie does look nice. And also, I like some of the ideas it's trying to explore. Basically, there are these gods on Earth, and they've been there for centuries. And they're left with the debate on whether or not they should help the human race out, or if they should let them figure it out and evolve on their own. And that's a very interesting idea. It kind of reminds me of Lex Luthor, because he's always hated Superman, because he believes that Superman, just by being around, has made the human race weaker. And I just think that's very interesting, because there's a lot of truth in that. And to see those ideas being on display here, it did grab me in moments, but I never found that they were fully explored. It's like the idea is brought up, but then it's immediately thrown away, and I'm just like, no, explore that some more. And it just lacks any sort of personal angle. There's nothing to get emotionally attached to. And the movie also lacks in any sort of perspective. Like, it only focuses on these gods. For the life of me, I can't figure out why they didn't have a human wisdom the entire movie. Okay, to be fair, they kinda did, but he was more of the comedic relief than anything meaningful. But like, it introduces the main character, and she has this relationship with this guy, and if he's along with them for the entire movie, we could get a different perspective on things. But they don't do that. So instead, it just focuses on these gods with only one perspective. And I'm just wondering, well, what's challenging their mindset? What in the story, what is happening to them that's challenging their views on everything? And I wish the movie dug into that a bit more. Like, why now? Are they now like, oh, maybe we should intervene? And I just never got a satisfying answer to that. Like, they tell you that they've come to care for the humans time and time again throughout this movie, but not once do you ever actually feel it. So it just leaves you feeling empty towards anything. Like, this movie is completely emotionally void, and it's just impossible to get attached to anything going on or anyone. This movie does have an amazing cast, but they really have nothing to do throughout this entire movie. Every single character just felt completely flat for me. They lacked any sort of personality that really allowed them to stand out, and I think that's essential in this kind of movie. And there's two cast members in particular that I found to be completely wasted. The first one is Kate Harington, who I already mentioned played the main character's boyfriend. And when he first appears, he's charming, he's likable, and I'm like, I look forward to seeing him be in this movie. And then he disappears for the next 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I'm like, why? Why would you do that? I get that it's the MCU and they're setting him up for future movies. But you got him in this movie. Why not utilize him? And I thought all the setup for his character was really poorly written. And then you also got Bill Skarsgård, who was great in the two It movies, and he's also in this really fantastic underrated horror movie called Villains, which definitely check it out. But I didn't even know Bill Skarsgård was in this movie until I was done, and I looked at IMDb, and I'm like, who was he? And then I looked up the character, I'm like, why would you get this amazing actor and have him play such a terribly, oh my goodness, like, they completely wasted those two actors. These characters are just terribly written. They're boring characters. You know, there was a point in the movie where I paused it. It was an hour and 12 minutes into the movie, and I'm just like, I feel like I don't know a thing about any of these characters. And then by the end of the movie, that was still the case. What motivates them? What challenges their mindset? What makes them happy? What scales them? Just give me something. If anyone was developed at all, it was actually, oh my goodness, what was his name? Droog. He's Barry Keoghan's character. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why he wasn't the villain here. Like, he's got this really great story, actually, and it just feels like a side note in this movie. Pretty much, he's just like, you know what? I'm tired of looking out for the humans when they're just going to destroy each other. So I'm just going to head and control them. Because he's got mind control power. So he actually enslaves thousands of humans. And I think that's a very interesting idea that ties in directly with the main theme and could have challenged the characters to go against one of their own. Like, why wasn't that this movie? Because the villains we got instead, the Deviants, I thought were the most boring, most pathetic enemies I've seen in a movie in quite some time. I'm just like, oh, like these are the big scary villains? Really? They didn't even feel like a real threat. And by the end of the movie, what the big threat really turns out being, it just reminds me of the cabin in the woods at the very, very end of that movie. That's what this movie reminded me of. And the story we got is just a complete mess. It focuses on all these different characters, it focuses on all these different time periods, and it never comes together. It just feels so all over the place and so scattered, and it just doesn't work in any sense. This movie is 2 hours and 30 minutes long. Like, you had all the time in the world with this movie to develop these characters, to develop their lore, to explore interesting questions, to explore all these different time periods in a way that makes sense with the story, and you just blew it. When your movie is this long, there's no excuse for this sloppy storytelling. There really isn't. And another negative of that runtime is that this movie is indeed very long and very boring. I definitely felt the length of it. It's a very slow-paced movie. And the funny thing about that is that this movie still ends on a cliffhanger. By the end of this movie, it doesn't feel like the story wrapped up in any sense. So you spend all this time and you can't even have an ending to this story. Like, if you want to be a TV show, fine, be a TV show. But if you want to be a movie, then be a movie. And that cliffhanger, I was just like, wait, really? We're just going to end the movie here? Like, why not just have that be the beginning of the next movie? Oh my goodness, this movie is just a complete mess. What else do I got written down? The jokes fall completely flat. Like, the MCU has gone overboard on the jokes recently, and I don't really laugh at them anymore. But these jokes were really bad. And not just that, they feel completely off from the rest of this movie because the rest of the movie has a very serious tone to it. And then whenever they pop in a joke, it just feels completely off from the rest of this movie. It feels like, oh wait, the studio mandated we have a joke at least once every 4 minutes. So you gotta get a joke in there someplace. Doesn't work at all. There's like one joke at the end where Brian Tyree Henry's character is mad at Angelina Jolie's. So he tells his kid to cover his ears. And you're like, oh, he's gonna say some mean things to her. And he just kind of like, what do you think you're doing? And then that's it. You know, like, I was expecting an F-bomb drop there or something. Because he's like to his kid, cover your ears. And it's meant to be this funny scene. But, yeah, not funny. Really bad. And one other negative I have of this movie is the IMAX cameras. IMAX cameras, when used properly, can be outstanding. But my goodness, this movie changes aspect ratio every 5 seconds in an action scene. Like, if you're going to use IMAX cameras, then keep it consistent, at least during an entire scene. Because you've got big, small, big, small, big, small. And it becomes so distracting when I'm trying to watch the movie. Like, it's on Disney Plus with the IMAX screen formatting. So that was just poorly handled. And okay, I admit this is a bit of a nitpick, but there's one character who can fly and shoot laser beams out of his eyes. And at one point, another character's like, oh, so you're like Superman. And I didn't like that. It took me right out of the movie. I'm just like, oh, so they have DC comics in the MCU? I don't know. It took me out of it. Yeah, that small line really did not work for me. The only movie I can think of that properly referenced comic books in its own movie is Logan. And yeah, I really didn't like that small scene. And one last negative I have for this movie, and it is a spoiler, so heads up, is that Harry Styles shows up in the mid-credit scene as Thanos' brother, and why isn't he purple? Like, the brothers, Thanos is purple, shouldn't he be purple? I don't know, maybe they didn't want to purplify Harry Styles or whatever. But yeah, this movie really didn't work for me. If you look at a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy, which takes all these characters that nobody heard of or nobody cared about and turned them iconic just like that, the cast brought them to life incredibly well. James Gunn infused so much personality into that movie, and everybody loved it. And we just get none of that here. I understand that's a completely different kind of movie, but it can be done. And with 2 hours and 30 minutes, for me to not care about any of these characters by the end, that's a complete failure. I couldn't have cared less about the story and the jumbled mess it was. The characters were incredibly boring, the performances all fell flat, the jokes were never funny, and even though it has some interesting ideas, it doesn't explore them in any way that's really going to resonate with me. You can see the potential in moments in this movie, but more often than not, it just completely falls apart. This is an awful, awful movie. I really hated it. So I'm going to go ahead and give The Eternals a 2 out of 10. That rating could honestly go down over time, but yeah, not a fan. But anyways, did you like The Eternals? What did you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe. Stay tuned for some more videos soon, and Gavin,